it's not always easy.
Yep, true. I crossed the bridge once myself. I was working in a doctor's office. He said, you need to have your office open when I am all open. I was making eyeglasses at the time as an optician, and it was part of his office. And I said, I can't do that. And I told you that when I came to work with you 3 or 4 years ago. And he said, you need to have your office open. If you can't do it, then hire somebody else to be here. I said, I can't do that either. I'd be paying them to work on Sabbath. That is not going to work. He said, then you can't be here anymore. And so I lost that position, that job, and packed up everything out and moved away. And struggled for another year or two, and then finally went into construction because I couldn't afford to keep going. Jeff?
I too had a job.
Art? Pink? Pink?
How about now?
Keep going, he'll get you.
All right.
A little more.
Hello. There we go.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I too had a job. I was about 19 years old. I was working in a body shop. And the man that hired me, I told him, I says, it's not a problem right now, because it was the middle of the summer and sun went down late. But I said, on Friday night in the winter time, I need to leave here about 5 o'clock. Oh, that won't be a problem. I may have said it before, but it was, and I lost my job over it. But God found me a better one.
Yeah, right. Yep, exactly. Roger.
Do we have examples in the Bible of people being put to death because of desecration of the Sabbath?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't recall anybody as an example that death was ensued upon. So I don't know that for sure.
So,
Yes.
how do we deal with that?
Don't work on Sabbath.
When I was in the Air Force, I had the opportunity to talk with the local sergeants and told them that I kept Saturday as a Sabbath, and I don't work during that. Can you work that out? He said, yeah, I think we could. Well, then the Cuban crisis came along.
Yep.
And everybody will be there and working.
Right.
And so I went to the sergeant. He said, I'm sorry, I don't believe I could help you out with that because of it came down from Washington.
Sure.
Yep.
And
so he said, I'll give you a chance to go talk to the sergeant that's over me,
right.
in the squadron. So I went all the way up until I got to the point to where they said, well, I don't think I can let you stay home, and not because this is a pretty serious thing. And so he said, I'll see if I can get you to see the guy that was in charge of the ministry, and just like in your position,
right.
chaplain,
The chaplain
for the whole thing.
Right.
And I said, well, okay. So I said, I'll bring my pastor, and we'll see what can be done. And he said, that's a good idea. Well, they met together, and he said, well, I'm sorry, Airman, but we just can't do that. He said, because of what we're facing. And so he said, well, you just have to, take what you got to get. And so the time came when all of the stuff, a lot of aircraft were going down to Florida and all of that. And so I told the sergeant, my immediate guy,
Right.
that I'd be glad to come in on Sunday and work 2 days. He said, well, I'm sorry, that won't. So I said, well, I'm going to pray about it and see. He said, because you could end up in court.
Right.
Court martial
Sure.
thing, and I knew what that was, in jail.
Yeah, right.
And so we were praying about it, and so when I went in on Sunday, and
He didn't go to work on Sabbath,
yeah,
Right, okay,
like you told him he wouldn't be there.
right.
and so I stayed around, and the sergeant said, Kaiser, he says, go on home. We'll work this thing out. He did. And the Lord worked it out.
Amen, amen.
Otherwise, I'd have been in jail.
Right, exactly, right. That's right. Yes, Managua.
I did not hear Roger's question. Was it, in Situation
there-
Bible,
Biblical evidence of death as a result of not keeping the Sabbath
of not
appropriately.
keeping the Sabbath? Okay, that's in Numbers 15,
Okay,
the Israelites stoning at God's command someone who broke the Sabbath.
okay, so that did happen?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, I didn't recall
I
that.
didn't catch whether it was
Numbers
for
13,
keeping the Sabbath. Numbers 15,
they stoned someone for not keeping the Sabbath properly.
yeah.
Okay, I didn't recall that one.
I
Thank
didn't
you.
know if he said keeping the Sabbath.
If someone was stoned because they did not keep the Sabbath, all right, okay. All right, so yes, it did happen. Dealing with it today, I don't know that it has its bearing today.
It'd have to be a command from God.
It was right there.
Right, I'm saying.
All right. George, you want to?
Numbers 15, 32 to 36.
15:32.
15:32 to 36.
Numbers, yeah, 15:32.
Okay.
All right.
Do you want me to read that real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and read that.
Numbers 15:32 to 36. And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day. And they that found him gathering sticks brought him unto Moses and Aaron and unto all the congregation. And they put him in ward, because it was not declared what should be done to him. And the Lord said unto Moses, the man shall be surely put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. And all the congregation brought him without the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died, as the Lord commanded Moses.
Serious business. All right. Okay, you want to continue then? Early counsel.
Sure. Early counsels on the Sabbath and the children. The house of God is desecrated, and the Sabbath violated by Sabbath believers' children. They run about the house, play, talk, and manifest their evil tempers in the very meetings where the saints have met together to glorify God and to worship Him in the beauty of holiness. The place that should be holy, where a stillness should reign, and where there should be perfect order, neatness, and humility, is made to be a perfect Babylon, and a place where confusion, disorder, and untidiness reign. This is enough to shut out God from our assemblies and cause His wrath to be kindled, that He will not be pleased to go out with the armies of Israel to battle against our enemies. God would not give the victory in the meeting. The enemies of our faith triumphed. God was displeased. His anger is kindled that His house should be made like Babylon. Above everything, take care of your children upon the Sabbath. Do not let them violate it, for you may just as well violate it yourself as to let your children do it. When you suffer your children to play upon the Sabbath, God looks upon you as a commandment breaker. You transgress His Sabbath.
All right,
Pretty strong words.
pretty strong. None of you here have children.
Are they talking about in church?
Yes, that is in church.
Okay.
Right. Okay, yes.
just one comment is that what boggles my mind is that talking with other Adventists who are from northeast and west of the United States, there's a lot of folks who actually, after church service, will go out to dinner, and they don't see anything wrong in going to restaurants when in fact the Sabbath command says you shall not make your maidservant or your manservant work. And I don't understand how they can justify going out and going even shopping or the cashier using it's I don't understand it.
I would be in the same camp. It's hard to understand. I don't understand it either. To me, it's violation. And she's going to speak to a little bit later in this chapter, meals and so forth. But yes, I agree. That's difficult for me to understand how people can justify that being the case. There may be occasions where it becomes a necessity. Jesus, walking with his disciples, picked the grains and ate it, because of the circumstances they were in. They hadn't prepared ahead of time to have a meal because of what was taking place. So, I mean, there are circumstances, I guess, to configure, but just because you didn't want to go home and have a meal at home and you went out to eat, to me that would be a little bit different in circumstances. Anyway, I would agree.
I think the language she uses is really interesting, that he will not go out to battle. He will not give the victory. This is in context of we're praying for things in the meeting to be done.
Right.
And he's saying he can't because we're not reverent enough. I mean,
Right. Yep.
I just want to comment.
Yeah.
I'm sure Managua, when you bring the school children in to play the bells, it's different here in the church than being over in the gym. And that in our children today have to be taught there's a reverence to God's house that you don't find in other locations. And I think it's so important that our kids are instructed with a respect for God's house.
Right.
I know this will probably never happen, but I would give anything to have my practice space not in the church, because it is not possible to maintain that level of reverence in a practice session. It's extremely difficult to even do it when you come into the sanctuary to play, but it's easier to have a practice space where you need a completely different environment and a different level of interaction. It's very difficult to make them understand the difference.
And that's why you don't practice in here frequently.
Right.
Exactly right.
Yes.
Or exactly. I know as the adventurers were preparing for their program, one of them, I think, jumped off the stage instead of going down the steps. And one of the helpers of the adventurers stopped and talked to that child and said, "This is God's house. We don't do rough house play. Be careful when you walk down the steps. Don't just jump and play." So it does happen at times, which is good, giving proper direction and so forth. All right? John, you want to read?
Yeah, I can.
Pass the mic back to him, one of them. Yeah, okay.
We're at no boisterous noise.
No boisterous, right.
All right, no boisterous noise and confusion. They, the entire family, come to the table without levity. Boisterous noise and contention should not be allowed any day of the week. But on the Sabbath, all should observe quietness. No loud tone commands should be heard at any time. But on the Sabbath, it is entirely out of place. This is God's holy day, the day he has set apart to commemorate his creative works, a day he has sanctified and hallowed. Manuscript 57, 1897. Seeking our own pleasure. I say to those who claim to be Sabbath-day Adventists, can you claim the seal of the living God? Can you claim that you are sanctified by the truth? We have not, as people, given the law of God and preeminence as we should. We are in the law of God, the preeminence as we should. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that. We are in danger of doing our own pleasure on the Sabbath day. No day for pleasure seeking, swimming, or ball playing. God would have all his gifts appreciated. All fragments, jots, and tittles are to be treasured carefully, and we are carefully to become acquainted with his necessities of others. All that we have of Bible truth is not merely for our benefit, but to impart to other souls, and this is to be impressed upon human minds, and every kindling word spoken to prepare the way to make a channel through which the truth will flow forth in rich currents to other souls. Every working of Christ and miracle was essential, and was a reveal to the world that there was a greater work to be done on the Sabbath day for the relief of suffering humanity, but the common work was not to be done. Pleasure-seeking, ball-playing, swimming was not a necessity, but a sinful neglect of the sacred days sanctified by Jehovah. Christ did not perform miracles merely to display his power, but always to meet Satan in afflicting, suffering humanity. Christ came in our world to meet the needs of the suffering, whom Satan was torturing.
All right. So, how do you view what you just heard? Okay, Doria.
No. I'm sorry. You finish and then.
Oh, I'm finished. I just continue until somebody else speaks
Okay.
up.
I thought that you were. I have a question.
Oh, good.
When it happens that, for example, I believe what she says. God gave her this message that we respect Sabbath and it's not to play. It's not to please ourselves, right?
That's right.
Our own pleasure.
And not to criticize, but because you don't know the people, so I'm not going to mention the people. It's in another church, but good people, nice people, Adventist people. And we went for a walk with Jeff and part of the family, and these Adventist people, they wanted to play with their kids, and we were part of the group because we went for a walk, and we never expected what happened. And then suddenly everybody was playing frisbee and ball, and I was feeling so uncomfortable. But I didn't do it, but I didn't act like, oh, you're weird or something. What do we do in those cases? Because I felt bad that I didn't say anything, but I was a stranger for them because I never met them before. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, I cannot say anything, right? What do we do? Pastor, we just don't say anything, or we say something, or what do we do in those cases? It's difficult.
Were they 7-day Adventists, or were they just...
Yes,
Okay.
7-day Adventists.
All right. Roger, thoughts?
I think our challenge is to get to the principle of what is
All right.
involved.
There we go.
Sometimes the specifics hang us up, and we get involved with that. Let's take ball playing. If I'm playing ball, I'm having a good time, and it says something about seeking your own pleasure on the Sabbath. When I'm playing ball, I'm not usually thinking about God.
Mm-hmm.
So while ball is not wrong, it distracts my thoughts. Okay, so let's take swimming. One of the most spiritual experiences I had was scuba diving and snorkeling on the Sabbath day in Hawaii, and it was a spiritual inspiration to be around beautiful fish.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a, quote, self-pleasure, just great time. So it's not necessarily the swimming that's an issue. Is this experience drawing us closer to God in a special way, or is it distracting?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going out in the mountains, that can be a spiritual experience, or it can be a distracting experience if I'm out there seeing how fast I can run my Jeep through the woods. and I'm out just tearing up stuff. So it's what's going on in our brains. Where's our focus?
Okay.
Is it drawing us to God, or are we doing our own thing?
All right. Roseanne?
Another thing about playing ball is it tends to be competitive, and the spirit of that, it's maybe not compatible with Sabbath keeping, but if you're tossing a frisbee and you're just having a friendly family outing, maybe not the same thing.
Okay.
I don't want to go too far into that. I will say that when my husband and I were newlyweds, we went to a retreat at a conference camp up in upstate New York in the Adirondacks. And that weekend, the church was together with that, and they had canoes. We said something about taking a canoe out on the lake, and the pastor said, no, not on Sabbath. And my husband, who was a new Adventist, said, what's the difference between taking a canoe on the lake just to see things
Nature.
or taking a hike? I think it requires more effort to take a hike. So, you know, people may look at things a little differently.
Right. All right. The name of the chapter is Principles. Okay? Go ahead, Wanagwa.
I was just going to say, I feel like every time I open Ellen White, she's stepping on my toes. And the thing that got my attention in the first part of the reading was she wasn't talking about the church service anymore. She talked about coming to the table.
Right.
And it made me think of how many times, and I'm guilty of this as much as anybody, as soon as church is over, volume goes up, and conversations, even in the sanctuary. And it just made me realize, like, how much we get caught up on the things that are okay to do as opposed to the spirit of reverence throughout the day. And to the point of it, we keep coming back to her words, not doing your own pleasure. That's a direct quote from Isaiah 58.
Right.
That's straight out of the Bible. Not doing your own pleasure, not speaking your own words
So,
on the Sabbath.
do you get pleasure on doing Bible studies? I do. It's cool. Me too. I don't do it on Sabbath.
Because it's your own place.
Literally. I do not go do Bible studies on Sabbath because that's what I do during the week. To me, that's my work. Even though I had pleasure, I'd rather sit down and have a Bible study for an hour or two than preach a sermon. Really, because it's the interaction and it's important to help people understand and do things together. But I don't do that on Sabbath. I don't go visit the sick on Sabbath. I don't go visit sick on Sabbath. That's my job. I do that every other day of the week.
Interesting.
Okay? And so unless it is specific to the need right then I might. I mean, I don't say, I can't come see you, but I don't make it a habit to go visit because I visit other times. And so, you know, what we just read on swimming and playing ball and whatever it was is a letter that is written. It's not necessarily general information that everybody needs to abide by. In specific, in principle, yes. These people may be doing things in their swimming and in their playing ball and in their whatever that, yes, is a neglect of honoring the Sabbath, as Roger was talking. What's the principle? If you lived on on an island where there weren't forests to go walking for on a Sabbath afternoon walk, why not swim and see the wonders that God has created that are out of our vision if we're on top of the ball rather than underneath the sea? And so the principle here is what's important. The same as playing ball. If it's a family, to build family closeness and togetherness and spirit, then a hard ball game of keeping score and creating difficulties, that's not what I'm talking about. But just playing as a family sport, so to speak, with frisbees, just tossing it back and forth. You're not competing. You're not trying to outdo. I think the principles are what we need to be cautious of. You know, yes, going to a pool party and whatever's happening in the swimming pool, that may not be in keeping with Sabbath. But that doesn't necessarily say you can't get wet. When I was growing up, you could go wading up to your knees, but you couldn't get wet all over. That would be acceptable on Sabbath. It's cool and refreshing. After you've huffed and puffed and all the way up to the top of the mountain, and finally there's a stream, you can get into your knees, but don't get very deep. You know, these rules and regulations sometimes aren't with the principle in mind. Jeff, you want to comment?
Yeah, I have a friend of mine. He's probably in his early 80s, Baptist man, good Christian guy, but his grandmother would never cook on Sunday, never. And she would never warm anything up that was prepared the day before. They just didn't do that. Now, this many years later, they go out to eat every Sunday. So there are some of these creeping compromises.
Yes.
Continue until you've completely violated what God was calling us to do.
And therefore, we need to remember a principle is what's important.
Right.
You know, not necessarily a specific action. Roger, and then back to Winagua.
Yeah, the principle is do what you can do in the preparation day rather than the Sabbath. Now, circumstances change. When I was a kid growing up, I got one bath a week. It was Friday afternoon. It was a tub, round.
Were you the first or the last?
Yeah, I was the first in. And, you know, it was a process of heating water and pouring in there. And it was a chore. It wasn't, today you jump in a shower and turn a knob.
And out like that.
Yeah.
All right. Yep.
So events change in how we do things.
That's right.
And what used to be a chore today may not be.
Okay. Winagua.
I think it can depend on what you do, like you said about the visiting or not. Like for someone, like you said, I think your grandma, Jeff, it's probably a chore cooking every day.
Right.
Versus me, I never get to cook. Cooking is something fun and relaxing I can do.
Oh, seeking your own pleasure, right?
Yeah, right. But to Doria's question, because I have the same question, what do you do in a situation where you feel like others are doing it around you and you're trying to follow the principle?
Keep reading.
Okay, good.
We're going to address, she addresses one of those similar issues anyway. That might come out a little more clear. All right.
Who will be next?
So we need to be cautious in what we're doing. I understand that. I'm not trying to throw caution to the wind. I'm just saying look at principles rather than specifics when she's particular in a letter written to certain people. She knows what they were doing and what they were dealing with, and so her admonition is directly to their issue, not necessarily a general statement of play in any sort or pleasure in any sort. You know, some people enjoy singing, okay? They come to church to sing. It's a pleasure. Is coming to church a pleasure? It says you can't do your pleasure on Sabbath, so you shouldn't come. And so, you know, we have a principle here.
But it also says Sabbath should be a delight.
Exactly right.
Yes, God
Exactly.
gave pleasure.
So, where's the principle and how are we making that application? Exactly right. All right. Sabbath dishes. Now we're getting into the eats. Okay.
We would charge all not to wash their dishes on
Amen.
the Sabbath
Amen.
if
Amen.
this can possibly be avoided. God is dishonored by any unnecessary work done on his holy day. It is not inconsistent, but proper, that the dishes should be left unwashed till the close of the Sabbath, if this can be managed. The Sabbath, a day of service. The first Sabbath of the week of prayer was a day of earnest activity. From Sunnyside and the school, 2 teams and a boat were sent to Dora Creek to bring to the meetings those who were not able to walk so far. The people had been invited to bring their lunch and come to the meeting prepared to spend the day, and they responded freely to the invitation. Some were much surprised that we would exert ourselves on the Sabbath to bring them to the meeting. They had been taught that Sunday keeping consisted largely in physical inactivity, and they thought that because we were zealous in the matter of Sabbath keeping, we would keep it according to the teachings of the Pharisees. We told our friends that in the matter of keeping the Sabbath, we studied the example and teachings of Christ, whose Sabbaths were often spent in earnest effort to heal and to teach, that we believed that one of our sisters who was nursing a sick family was keeping the Sabbath as much as the one who was leading a division in Sabbath school. That Christ could not please the Pharisees of his day, and that we did not expect that our efforts to serve the Lord would satisfy the Pharisees of our day.
Exactly. Isn't that cool? All right. So there's some principles being applied here. You know, yes, Jesus healed, and the Pharisees jumped all over him. Here you are working on Sabbath. You know, you're spitting in the mud and making mud and, you know, all kinds of things.
He didn't want anybody to suffer on his holy day.
Oh, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Okay. All right.
Sacred and secular activities. The priests in the temple performed greater labor on the Sabbath than upon other days. The same labor in secular business would be sinful, but the work of the priests was in the service of God. Far-reaching example of a headquarters church. My mind has been burdened in regard to the condition of the church in this place. There was much need of exalting the standard in this place in many respects before a correct and saving influence could go forth to other places. As the truth has been presented here, it has taken persons from the world and from the churches and brought them together in church capacity. But not all who have professed to believe the truth are sanctified through it. God calls upon the workers in this mission to elevate the standard and to show their regard for his requirements by honoring the Sabbath. From this place, the publications are sent out, and the laborers go forth to proclaim the commandments of God. And it is of the greatest importance that a right influence be exerted by this church, both by precept and example. The standard must not be placed so low that those who accept the truth shall transgress God's commandments while professing to obey them. Better, far better, would it be to leave them in darkness until they could receive the truth in its purity.
Okay. An interesting word was used in that paragraph, and that is standard. Okay? Standard is an application of truth. Okay? Standard in itself is not truth. It's the application of truth. And so sometimes standards are a little variable as we make application to the truth relative to where we are, the times we live, and the conditions we find ourselves. She was directing this comment to a headquarters church, like a conference church or the general conference church, or a specific church that had a job of truly reaching out to those who are unchurched and sending workers out and so forth. And so her comments to them were, some of those standards you need to not necessarily have on the lower realm, but they need to be raised to a higher realm because of where you're at and who you're reaching. And so, standards is an important word to remember as we understand God's work and so forth.
So it's applying the principle. That is the standard.
Right.
Right?
Okay. How you're applying a principle,
Okay.
then that would be a standard. Okay. The principle's not changing, but how you see it and read it and put it into practice may make a difference. Lenoy, did you?
Okay. Seventh-day Adventists being watched, there are those who are watching. This people is to see that what is the influence of the truth upon them. The children of this world are wiser in their generation than the children of the light. Let me hold it so I can see it better.
Okay.
I see where I was.
Children of light, and then when the claims.
Okay. The children of this world are wiser in their generation than the children of light. When the claims of the fourth commandment are set before them, they look to see how it is regarded by those who profess to obey it. They study the life and the character of its advocates to learn whether these are in the harmony with their profession of faith and up under the opinions thus formed. Many are influenced under the very largely in acceptance of the rejection of the truth. If this people will conform their lives to the Bible standard, they will be indeed a light in the world, a Christ set upon the hill.
All right, so that's the same group that the first part of the problem was talking to, all right? So, interestingly enough, the comment of, I would rather see a sermon than hear one, is what's being said here. You know, we can say all kinds of things, but how do we live? And we have to be cautious each and every day that people are watching how we live and comparing that to what we say and say, why should I go to that church? Okay? So we need to be cautious in that regard. Okay. Yes, Roseanne first, going to comment.
Well, I was just thinking of the saying, actions speak louder than words. Words are important too.
Oh, yes, that's true.
But a lot of times what we do shows what's inside.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. Okay, Jeff.
The importance and glory of the Sabbath. Yesterday, which was the Sabbath, we had a sweet, glorious time. The Lord met with us, and the glory of God was shed upon us as we were made to rejoice and glorify God for his exceeding goodness unto us. I was taken off in vision. I saw that we sensed and realized but little of the importance of Sabbath, to what yet we should realize and know of its importance and glory. I saw we knew not what it was yet to ride upon the high places of the earth, and fed with the heritage of Jacob. But when the refreshing and the latter rain shall come from the presence of the Lord and the glory of his power, we shall know what it is to be fed with the heritage of Jacob and to ride upon the high places of the earth. Then shall we see the Sabbath more in its importance and glory, but we should not see it in all its glory and importance until the covenant of peace is made with us, and the voice of God and the pearly gates of the New Jerusalem are thrown open and swing back on their glittering hinges, and the glad, joyful voice of the loving Jesus is heard richer than any music that ever fell on mortal ears, bidding us enter. I saw that we had a perfect right in the city, for we had kept the commandments of God, and heaven sweet is our home, for we have kept the commandments of our God.
All right. Interesting, she starts out that. We had had a sweet and glorious time. And then I had this vision that you ain't seen nothing yet. How much glorious and sweeter it will be when we fully come to understand what the Sabbath is all about. To be in God's presence. And she then concludes that, we had the perfect right to be there because we had kept the commandments, even though we may not have thought or enjoyed Sabbath the way we will when we get in God's presence. Anyway, I thought that was interesting in just a couple of paragraphs there that she was referring to. We had a wonderful Sabbath, but it doesn't even compare to what it's going to be like when we're with Christ. That was just an interesting comparative statement to say, and yet then conclude, but we had a good Sabbath. It wasn't that we were off base, we just weren't fully engaged in knowing and understanding what it will be like. And so, you know, we need to observe and observe and observe our principles and commandments and keeping the Sabbath the way we should, but realize we're just doing what we know, and it's not what God has prepared for us. Doria.
I was just thinking when you were saying that God really wants us to enjoy Sabbath so
Yes.
much here to get used to more.
Right.
Because He is going to give us more and more and more, and we cannot even imagine the blessings. So He wants us to get used little by little, not to be killed by His glory when He really
That's right.
gives us more.
Very true. Roger.
There's a common phrase we use, but I don't think we got it all together in understanding. And that phrase is, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Could you explore that or sharpen that up a little bit more?
The Sabbath was a gift from God. Our keeping it is a statement of our loyalty to Him. If we want to make the Sabbath restrictive and difficult and hard to accomplish and unenjoyable, then we are making Sabbath. Okay? God made the Sabbath and gives it to us. What we make of it is what's wrong.
We make a mess.
Okay? If we have so many rules and so many restrictions, and you got to wear this kind of clothing, you can't wear this, we can make it miserable. And God says, I'm giving you something wonderful. Enjoy it.
We're supposed to call it a delight.
Exactly right. Okay? But not have our own pleasure. Don't be seeking pleasure, but call it a delight. Roseanne, did you want to say something more?
Oh, you've said it well. I just thought I would add that God made man first, and Sabbath was a gift.
That's right. Here we go. That's very true. And so, that's the difference in God made it for man, and man's not trying to remake it so that we can be obedient to God. God says, you can have your cake and eat it too, as long as it's sugar-free and not chocolate and not have dairy and not have, it's the principle here. It's not the exactness, it's the principle. Okay? You can have your cake, but you can't eat it because you're having too much fun enjoying the Sabbath. And that's not allowed. You can't laugh on Sabbath? That would be pleasure. You can't, man wants to put all these restrictions. That's why I said we need to look at standards and principles and how we apply what God intends for us to do. It's not a list of things. Oh, I did all these things. Well, you didn't do them for the right reason. What's the motive behind it? Are you trying to prove something, or are you trying to enjoy life? Winogwin and Jeff.
A book I read talked about the practice of the presence of God and trying to keep in mind as you go through your day that God is actually there with you all the time. And I think that's the biggest thing about Sabbath, is like it gives you a whole day just to focus on that
Right.
without having all the other distractions and everything. It's kind of a reset button.
Right. I've been reprimanded for using humor in sermons. It's like, can't have fun in church, duh, can't go there. Jeff and then Roger.
I know that sometimes some of the young people think people look down their nose at them on Sabbath. They're looking at what they're wearing, and kids look at what people drive too. And a lot of people may not dress a certain way, but they drive a certain car. And if we point at somebody, there's more fingers pointing at us than us pointing at them.
Yep, right.
So we need to be an example and work out our own salvation with fear
things.
and trembling.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Roger.
And along the same line, with children, you've got to spell out details.
Right.
But a lot of us are still children spiritually, and we got to get past the details to the standard and the principles.
Right, exactly. Yep. It's how it melds into our life. How that we can be filled with Christ's presence and allow His Spirit to dwell within us and fit the mold. And the mold's going to be different for every person and every situation and every location. You know, God made us all individuals. Yes?
I was just thinking one of those examples is as adults setting the example, not to judge and reminding on that, because, for instance, your scenario with what people drive, I know a story of where my great-grandfather was given a Cadillac. He was a pastor. He did not have money. He would not have chosen that car, and he cringed every time he drove certain places with it. But it was a gift. So, you know, a lot of times we look at people and we think we know the reason for that outfit or that car or that whatever.
Yep.
And, yeah.
I was given a Lincoln. Anyway, now I drive a little bitty Honda.
It's all about the mileage, isn't it?
So, you know, we need to be cautious as we make judgment calls to others, realizing God blesses different people with in different ways. Yes. And some of us have lots of brains, and some of us have lots of money. They don't necessarily have to go together. But anyway. So, being cautious. The rest of this chapter is really wonderful. We'll look at it next week. It's how the White House, not the one in D.C., but Ellen White's house, spent Sabbath. And she makes a lot of little notations about lots of different Sabbaths as they progress and what they're doing. And some of them are pretty interesting, okay? But anyway, it's just a good notation. All right. Prayer time. Anything on our agendas for prayers? Microphone so that people can hear also on Zoom.
My brother's mother-in-law was rushed to the hospital for about the third or fourth time in the last 2 weeks. Very serious condition that she's in. Her name's Linda Martin. And I'd like her church family to remember Linda and her husband Lee.
Okay. All right. One Auburn?
2 things. The Vespers program, obviously, to keep all the kids well and that it will be a blessing. Also, do we have an update on Dan Agneta?
Yeah, we do. Oh, you want me to share that?
Absolutely.
Dan had his surgery this morning. Dan Agneta. And according to the medical doctors, it went well.
Wonderful.
They're still wondering how now to change his antibiotics and what to do to keep it from becoming an infection. And he said yesterday when I visited with him, he would probably be in the hospital a week before he can move much. When I was there, he said, I can't move my head. I can't move it up and down. I can't move it back and forth. He said, so if you'll... He cannot. He cannot. Because where the problem was in a position that no matter what he did, it was going to affect it and irritate it and make it worse or whatever. And so he said, you stand at the end of the bed, a little bit to the right of center, and that way I can talk to you and see you. But he's hopeful that things will work out well. It was a very tedious and risky place to be for surgery and what was taking place. But yes, he came through surgery. I have not talked to him or Nancy since then. I just know the doctors had reported that they felt like it all went well. And so they're just looking for the recovery part now. And then he said, beyond a week in the hospital, it'll probably be months before he can really do a whole lot. Again, because this motion is not going to be free to go. And so he has to be cautious and have follow-up treatments 2 or 3 times a week, maybe even having to go back to the doctor's office and stuff. I mean, it's not just take a pill type thing. Anyway. Yes, Roger.
I'd like to ask that we pray for the Holy Spirit to lead. I want to start Bible studies next Wednesday at 9 o'clock in the morning. And we're focusing on inviting people as they come through the thrift store and share thy bread and they're checking out. We want to give them a personal invitation to come to these Bible studies.
Mm-hmm.
Would like to also put it out on the sign for drive-bys and for church members. A lot of church members say, I don't know if I could give a Bible study.
Mhm.
Well, just come and bring a friend,
Right.
and we'll work through it. Anyway, would pray that the Holy Spirit will lead and bring the hungering spiritual to the meetings.
Right.
Amen.
Yes, and Doria.
I just want to thank God for Mark Balbin and Debbie. They are a testimony. I mean, he's passing through things very hard, difficult, but he has this attitude, so positive and strong will. I just want us to see the testimony they are as a couple, as people of God, and they are an example for me. I mean, I am thankful for them.
He never complains.
Yes,
Right. That's true. That's true.
and it's good
Yeah.
to see them.
Right. All right. Okay, those of you on Zoom, if you want to unmute and visit with one another, we'll cut you off here, hearing and seeing and listening and whatever. And we'll have our prayer time together. So I invite you to kneel then.